Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome here to Corpus for those of you who are joining us in person, and also a very warm welcome to those of you who are joining us remotely via the live stream. And many thanks to our speaker, Professor Stern, for kindly being willing to allow her lecture to be live streamed so that an even bigger audience can enjoy it. It is a great pleasure to welcome Professor Tiffany Stern, who is Professor and Chair of Shakespeare and Early Modern Literature at the Shakespeare Institute in Stratford. Tiffany is well known in these parts because before that she was a Fellow of University College, and there are a good number of us in the room, I think, and maybe some of those who are joining remotely who have some of Tiffany's many books and editions on our shelves. She also is a very generous general editor of the indispensable New Mermaids and Norton and now Arden 4 series as well. So her name will be very familiar to this and future generations of students of English and Shakespeare enthusiasts all over the world, I'm sure. It's a pleasure as well to welcome representatives of the Bateson family. Thank you for joining us. Freddie Bateson, in whose honour this lecture was established and named, was the lecturer and then teaching fellow in English here at Corpus from 1946 to 1969. It was much admired and loved, and his legacy continues in very many areas, including this lecture in his memory. So, welcome to Corpus. Thank you very much, Tiffany, and we very much look forward to your lecture.
Thank you, Helen, for that generous introduction. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, streamed people, for being there. And many thanks to the Bateson family. It's been lovely to meet you. So I'm very grateful to be here. Let me just introduce this talk. And I'll introduce it by looking at this first slide here, which says, "Our merry ballads and lascivious plays are much alike. The one sings, the other says, and both are fripperies of another's froth." So it says they're both equally rubbish, but also that they co-produce one another. And that's what my talk is going to be about, the relationship between plays and ballads. And I'm going to talk in 4 parts. The first part will be the really long one, so don't worry that it goes on and on. And that will be about ballads that are in plays. Second part will be ballads after plays. Third part will be ballads about plays. And the fourth part will be some context for plays and ballads from which I'll draw some conclusions. So that is the structure. And so now the first long part, ballads in plays. And let me start by just explaining what I mean by a ballad in the early modern period. I don't just mean an oral song, though I do. I really mean this text, a text like this. This is a broadsheet ballad. It's a folio-sized large piece of paper. And this is a fairly standard ballad, so that's why I've picked it. You get the title at the top. This one is a caveat for cut purses, so a warning against people who might cut your purse and steal it. And under that, you can see it says to the tune of Packington's Pound. Ballads didn't give you the actual music. That's because printing music was expensive and not everyone could read it. Instead, ballads were to tunes you already knew, so that there are many more ballads than there are tunes. Keep looking at this ballad. You'll see it's got 4 pictures, and you'll see they're somewhat ill-matched, and they don't really work in size terms with one another. Ballads always have pictures, but they are seldom specific to that ballad. They're usually of general relevance. But that makes ballads quite amazing texts, because as you can see, they're entirely print, but they're also beautifully decorated, such that even if you were illiterate, you might buy a ballad to hang it in your house. And ballads were also, ale houses were filled with them, milking sheds, because the ladies liked a nice rhythm to milk their cows. So ballads were everywhere. But also, of course, this is entirely musical. So it's entirely text, but entirely performance, entirely musical, very pictorial, a really wonderful sort of, a tremendous piece of both literature and performance. I'm just going to look at the very, very start of this ballad, which says, "My masters and friends and good people draw near, and look to your purses, for that I do say, and though little money in them you do bear, it costs more to get than to lose in a day." And as you see, the top part of that ballad is in black letter, but the bottom part isn't. That's a repeating chorus. "Youth, youth, thou hadst better been starved by thy nurse than lived to be hanged for cutting a purse." Chorus, anyone can join in with. And so what's great about a chorus is that even if you can't read the ballad, if someone else can read and sing the ballad, you can join in. Okay, so that's a general ballad. And what I should say about all ballads is what's very tricky if you're trying to study ballads is it's tremendously difficult to date them. So this ballad, we can date this bit of paper, but it does not date this ballad. And because ballads are very ephemeral, they survive from when they survive, but when they survive is not their actual date. And that will come to be relevant as I discuss their use in plays. Anyway, we've now seen a standard ballad of the period. And I'm going to turn on to Ben Jonson's play, Bartholomew Faire. In this play, there is a ballad singer-seller. Ballad sellers were always also ballad singers, and you would sing your ballad by way of advertising it, and people would flock round you, and you would sell the ballad. In this play, this ballad singer-seller works together with a cut purse. So while people are gathered around the ballad singer-seller, the cut purse plies his trade. And that's the joke in this scene. But look at the ballad that Nightingale is singing. "My masters and friends and good people draw near, and look to your purses, for that I do say," etc. It's the ballad we have just been looking at. But here it is inside a play. So then our question is, well, that's interesting. In this play, which has a ballad singer-seller, that sells the ballads fictionally to the characters in the play, but it also sells it kind of factually to us. Because either we know that ballad already and it puts it in our mind and we want to buy it, or we don't know it already and we learn it from the play and want to buy it. So some ballad salesmanship is going on here between this play and something like that very text I've just shown you, which, as you see, does survive as a broadsheet ballad. So then the question is, did Ben Jonson use an already extant ballad and put it in his play? Or did he write a ballad and send it out there? And because of dating problems, we can't really tell. But we can see that Ben Jonson is promoting this ballad as an object to be sold in his drama. And now I should apologise for the tiny weeny bit of singing I did just now. My husband, who's in the room, very specifically told me not to sing. But I did just want to remind you that these printed texts are songs. We're sticking with Ben Jonson. And here's another Ben Jonson ballad. And this is a really weird, interesting one. So it's in a masque of his. And masques are much more elevated than plays. Masques which are sung and enacted usually only once at court, though this one was performed twice at court. They're very exclusive drama that most people can't get anywhere near. Now, in this masque, as published in his works, this happens. A man called John Urson enters. Ursus means bear, and so his name is John Bear, and he is a bear ward. and he enters with his dancing bears. And he enters with his dancing bears, and he starts singing a song about those bears, which goes, "Though it may seem rude for me to intrude with these, my bears, by chance, 'twas sport for a king if they could sing as well as they can dance." And the ballad goes on. The Ballad of Urson and the Singing Bears, specially written for the Masque of Augurs. But now here is a play by Thomas Randolph. And rather like Bartholomew Faire, it also features a ballad singer-seller who's also a bit dodgy. This ballad singer-seller promotes a new ballad, and people, when they hear one is new, they come flocking round. "Come, sirs, pence apiece, here's a new ballad, a dainty new ballad, newly printed and newly come forth, concerning His Majesty's subjects, the bears, and Urson, their reverend instructor." And the boy is thrilled. "Run, boys, run, a new ballad, a new ballad." And Bidstand starts to sing that ballad. "Though it may seem rude for me to intrude with these, my bears, by chance, 'twas sport for a king if they could sing as well as they can dance." Well, it's the ballad from Masque of Augurs. But we learn a little bit more about it as a physical artifact to be sold by ballad singer-sellers. "Have they, the ballads, any fine pictures I trow at them?" "Yes, of 3 dancing bears and Urson." So this play seems to sell a physical form of the ballad that Ben Jonson wrote for his Masque. And it seems to tell us a little bit more about that physical ballad, that it had pictures that it had ballad-specific picture on it of the 3 dancing bears and Urson. And if a ballad has a ballad-specific picture rather than a random gathering of pictures, well, that's meaningful. That means a lot of money has been spent on it. So this play seems to be pushing Ben Jonson's physical ballad, suggesting that Ben Jonson, who writes these very high courtly dramas, also lets bits of them circulate as popular ballads. And indeed, that does seem to be the case, because here is the oddest thing, and this is from 1650. It's a book by Sir John Menz, and it's a largely unillustrated book of bits and pieces, jokes and various other bits of stuff. And you get quite far into the book, and it has some poems, and it suddenly has pictures. And here is one such picture. And as you can see, it is a picture of a bear ward and 3 dancing bears. "Though it may seem rude for me to intrude with these, my bears, by chance, etc." What we seem to have here, then, is a tiny trace, a shadow of Ben Jonson's physical ballad that doesn't survive. It doesn't in itself survive. But what we seem to have is the picture for it. Pictures last longer than ephemeral texts. And actually, John Menz seems to have acquired this picture and so stuck it into his book. So here we have, as it were, a distributed bit of that lost ballad. And all this shows us that Ben Jonson was a writer of ballads, and not just a writer of ballads, but something of a marketer of ballads. And that his plays, which we often think of, or he often presented as rather high drama, were also circulating in bits and pieces, and were first circulating as songs. Here's another hint about Ben Jonson and ballad writing. This is a letter by John Chamberlain, he's a gossip, and this is some gossip he passes on. "For lack of better news, here is a ballad of Ben Jonson's in the play at the Lord Marquis at Burley." So that's another masque, Gypsies Metamorphosed, "for which, and other good service, he hath his pension from 100 marks increased to £2,000 per annum, besides the reversion of the mastership of the revels." So he seems to say, Ben Jonson is being enormously praised and congratulated for his ballads, amongst other things, and also enclosed in the letter, and the enclosure is lost, is one such ballad. So again, it must be a printed ballad. And indeed, in that same book again, we have a distributed leftover of that ballad, its picture, flanked by its song. So just to say, we can now see that Ben Jonson, writer of what he often presents as high literature, he's funny about it, but he's also a writer of what is often thought of as rather low literature, ballads. And as I say, he monetizes his plays quite early on, or someone does, by getting them circulating in ballad form. And it's not bad to have bits of your play circulate as a ballad, because that'll serve to remind people of the play or to advertise the play without giving away too much of the dialogue. So there's a useful but tense and intriguing relationship here between Ben Jonson's ballads and plays. And that's enough Jonson. Let's move on to Shakespeare. He also has a thing about ballads. It's slightly different from Ben Jonson's. So let's have a look. Here's a ballad that Shakespeare really, really likes. And this is an excellent ballad entitled The Constancy of Susanna. And this is a story from the book of Daniel in the Bible. So ballads do all sorts of things, and this is a Bible ballad. And as you can see, it's got some random pictures there. And it also says it's to an excellent new tune. So if you want to learn the tune, you're going to have to hang around by the ballad singer-seller to pick up the excellent tune, and then buy the ballad. The very start of it, it's so tiny on my screen, I hope I can read it, says, "There dwelt a man in Babylon, of reputation great by fame, who took to wife a fair woman, Susanna she was called by name, a woman fair and virtuous, lady, lady." I won't read on. And there's a refrain of lady, lady. Here's a bit from Merry Wives. Hugh Evans starts to sing that song when as I sat in Babylon. He has a Welsh accent, which I'm not going to try here. Here it is in Twelfth Night. Am I not of her blood? Tilly Valley, lady, there dwelt a man in Babylon, lady, lady. And here in Romeo and Juliet, I wonder if we don't have that ballad again in these repeated ladies. And the reason why I think these might all refer back to that ballad is because the lady, lady bit in the ballad goes lady, lady. So it changes stress, lady, lady. And Shakespeare seems to have this lady, lady thing. And I wonder if it's not because he's lady, ladying it onto the audience, who all, of course, will recognise this ballad. And so Shakespeare here is doing something rather different from what Ben Jonson was doing. He's uniting his audience in their shared knowledge and love of the ballad. And all the context of the ballad and the other words of the ballad are sort of there. But also a bit in the way, I had a student recently who gave an interesting talk on Jukebox Musicals. These are musicals with ABBA songs and things in them. And I think this is something like that the audience will sing along, maybe actually, or maybe in their heads, to these well-known uniting words and tunes. And talking of tunes, here's a tune Shakespeare really, really loves. And remember, many different words can have one tune. So here we hear of the tune, let's sing it to the tune of Lighter Love. Clap us into Lighter Love, that goes without a burden. Do you sing it and I'll dance it? And that reminds us that ballad tunes are ballad tunes if you put words to them, and they're dances if you dance to them. The distinction between what's a song and what's a dance is quite a lot vaguer then, which you can tell even from the word ballad, which comes from ballare and means to dance. He'll dance the morris and gallops to the tune of Lighter Love. But also, Shakespeare just loves the tune of Lighter Love. Now, did he, like Ben Jonson, also write ballads? It's a little trickier to tell with him than it is with Ben Jonson, and maybe it's not an important question to ask, but I'll show you some resonant and weird answers. I'm starting with a book. This is a very odd book, published in 1599 by Jaggard, the man who goes on to publish the folio many years later. And it's called The Passionate Pilgrim, and it is said to be by William Shakespeare. What it actually has in it is a mixture of poems, some by Shakespeare and some by Barnfield and other people. So it's a slightly lying book. And indeed, we have some reason to think that Shakespeare was upset by this book. So we have to treat anything in this book kind of with caution. However, here is this book said to be by Shakespeare. And inside the book, there's a little subdivision. And that's that there's a new frontispiece kind of inside the book called Sonnets to Sundry Notes of Music. So heralding that the bits of literature, and sonnet had a vaguer meaning in this time and could mean poem more generally. So the poems after this bit are musical ones. And we then get this poem. Live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove that hills and valleys, dales and fields, and all the craggy mountains yield. And some of you will recognize this poem and will know it as a Christopher Marlowe, rather high pastoral poem. But it was first published as a song by William Shakespeare. And it was third published as a song by William Shakespeare. It was second published as a poem by Marlowe. It was third published as a poem by William Shakespeare. When in Merry Wives, and again, were with the Welshman whose accent I cannot, alas, replicate. So I'm going to, but at this moment in the play, he is frightened, and he's comforting himself by singing snatches of song. Jesu bless me, how my heart throbs and throbs. And then she made him beds of roses and 1,000 fragrant posies, 2 shallow rivers. Now so God judge me, my heart swells more and more. Methinks I can cry. Poor man. Here is this same text published the next year, that is fourth time of publication, as a ballad. But it's already being sung in the play as a ballad. Here it's called A Most Excellent Ditty of the Lover's Promises to His Beloved, to a sweet new tune called Live With Me and Be My Love. So this ballad has a specific tune written for it. Again, a sign of a really tremendous ballad with a lot of artistry and work put into it. And there's the bit that we've just heard Sir Hugh singing. By shallow rivers to whose falls melodious birds sing madrigals. And I will make thee beds of roses and 1,000 fragrant posies. So I don't know if I'm hesitantly suggesting that maybe this is by Shakespeare rather than Marlowe. I possibly am not. I'm much more clearly suggesting that this is a ballad as much as, more than, it's a simple poem. That it comes with a tune, the tune is quite elemental to its character. This also reminds us that ballads, which we think of as low literature because they travel everywhere and they're so cheap, but high and low literature, these words don't really quite make sense in this form. This is a confused form, and its poetry can be as good as it wishes. Sticking with Shakespeare, here is another ballad. loved by him, and again, who knows, maybe written by him, maybe not. I'm going to read the start of it. A poor soul sat sighing under a sycamore tree. Oh, willow, willow, willow. With his hand on his bosom, his head on his knee. Oh, willow, willow, willow. This is a song about an extremely depressed man. He's forlorn, he's forsaken in love, he's in great grief, and he's weeping like the weeping willow. Now, here's Shakespeare's Othello in folio form. And this is a scene in which Desdemona and Emilia are having a conversation, a woman's talk, about the problematic, awful things that are happening. And particularly, Desdemona is very forlorn in love because Othello's turned from her and she doesn't know why. And she says, "My mother had a maid called Barbary. She was in love, and he she loved proved mad and did forsake her. She had a song of willow." So before I get to the song, let's look a little bit at this. So Desdemona thinks of her mother, and thinks of her mother's maid, and thinks of her mother's maid's song. So this song she's about to sing is not a new song, it's presented as an old, old song, and a song that joins one class with another. Here we get Desdemona going back to the mother's maid through this song. And the mother's maid was called Barbary, a strange name, sometimes thought to be a familiar form of Barbara, but sometimes in this play of black and white, thought maybe to indicate that the maid was from the Barbary coast and was in fact black. In which case this song also covers not only time and class, but race. And here it is, the ultimate song of all unhappy women. The poor soul sat singing by a sycamore tree, sing all a green willow, her hand on her bosom, her head on her knee, sing willow, willow, willow. So what's extraordinary here is that Shakespeare seems to have taken that broadside ballad that's about a very unhappy man and regendered it to be about a deeply unhappy woman. And that seems odd. Why doesn't he just write his own sad woman song? Well, one suggestion is that if the audience know this ballad, if he's using a known ballad, then they'll feel the extraordinary disconnect between their knowledge that the ballad's about a man and their experience here that it's the ultimate woman's ballad. And that will allow this ballad simultaneously to be about Desdemona and maybe Emilia and their sorrow, but also at the same time about Othello and his sorrow. So it could be that extra context allows this song further meaning. As I say, it's a little difficult to see this through because it's hard entirely to know whether the ballad precedes the play or whether Shakespeare wrote the ballad, in which case he wrote it, it seems, with two gender possibilities. What is the case is that he expects you, the audience, to know this ballad very, very well. Because Desdemona sings very far through the ballad. And she gets right up to, "Let nobody blame him, his scorn I approve." Nay, that's not next. Now, why does she say, nay, that's not next? That surely asks you, the audience who know the ballad very well, to think about, oh, what is in fact next? Except that demands an incredibly intricate knowledge of this ballad from you. And a little later on, I'll address how it is that the audience might know these ballads so very well. Let's look at what is next, going back to the ballad. It's "Let nobody blame him, blame me, her scorns I do prove. She was born to be fair, and I die for her love. So what we have here, the genders are reversed, is a proleptic look forward to the death that is going to occur. And as you can see here, if you know the ballad, you get the extra frisson of what the missing line says. And if you don't know the ballad, that's also fine. But this play a little bit thinks maybe you do. Now, sometimes it seems pretty clear Shakespeare unambiguously wrote ballads, and that's in the scenes that are very like the other scenes I've shown you, when he actually stages a ballad singer-seller. And one such is Autolycus in Winter's Tale. What hast here? Ballads? Pray now, buy some. I love a ballad in print. And here's the in print means that it physically exists. You can buy it. And Autolycus, the ballad singer-seller, says, why, this is a passing merry one, and goes to the tune of Two Maids Wooing a Man. So once again, you name the tune. And it's lucky we had the tune on it a month ago, so they already know the tune. This works in fictional terms because they can immediately sing the ballad, but it also tells us how these tunes might circulate ahead of a ballad, or rather might circulate with a different ballad. So you might indeed buy several ballads to the same tune. You like the tune, so you regularly buy ballads to it. And here is, it seems, a ballad by Shakespeare. It's not exceptional. Get you hence, for I must go, where it fits not you to know. But ballads aren't always exceptional. But once again, we have a play that seems to be urging sales of this particular text. Now, I'll show you something very weird and fascinating that Shakespeare does with a ballad. And this is in the play of The Tempest. And in the play of The Tempest, Trinculo and Stephano start singing a song, Flautum and Scoutum. But they're drunk. They don't sing it very well. It seems to be out of tune. Caliban, that's not the tune. And then Ariel, here's a stage direction. Ariel is invisible to everyone in the play, except Prospero. Ariel plays the tune on a tabor and pipe. So Ariel plays the correct tune. And Stephano and Trinculo, he's invisible, they can't see him, they're bemused. Where's this tune come from? What is this same? This is the tune of our catch, played by the picture of nobody. What's interesting here is, this is the tune, but he doesn't say it's played by nobody. He says it's played by the picture of nobody. And now I'm going to give a digression, which isn't a digression, to talk about the picture of nobody. And I'll start by showing you the picture of nobody. This is from the play of Nobody and Somebody. And there is the picture of nobody. And the picture of nobody is super famous because the picture and the character in the play is called Nobody, and he has no body, only breeches that go up to his neck. So there is nobody. And so famous was this picture that its printer, John Trundle, here at the bottom, I'll blow it up for you, printed for John Trundle and are to be sold at his shop in Barbican at the sign of Nobody. So he makes that picture his shop sign. You didn't have streets with numbers, obviously, you found shops by signs. So that's Trundle's sign and his signature play. And he also sells freestanding pictures of nobody if you want one in your house but you don't want to buy the play. So nobody is, the picture of nobody is absolutely deeply rooted in the printing of John Trundle. But so popular is that picture of nobody, it gets all over the place, onto warming pans and all sorts of strange things. The warming pan has a legend round the side which goes, "Who burned the bed? Nobody." And it's got a picture of nobody on it. But there are also, in a kind of fan fiction way, nobody seems to have worked his way into ballads. And here is one such ballad. And the ballad is called Nobody His Counsel to Choose a Wife. So this is an advice ballad. So ballads do all sorts of ballads are a little bit like magazines. They're each like a little article that promotes something. Nobody here, you have a problem. Should you marry a maid or a widow? And nobody helps you think through the issue. Yes, a maid is younger and maybe prettier, but a widow is going to have more money and be more sexually knowing and probably be grateful to you. So on balance, go for a widow. And there's a picture on this ballad. You can see there's nobody. And he's holding hands with the ideal wife, who also has no body, just a skirt that goes up to her neck. So if we go back now to the Shakespeare, this is the tune of our catch played by the picture of nobody. Shakespeare is saying that you can get that ballad that Ariel is playing from Trundle, he's the printer. Okay, so this is Shakespeare's, the only time when Shakespeare kind of deals, it seems, with printers in his time, and it is with a printer in their ballad capacity. So we certainly have a Shakespeare who's pushing ballads, and who's pushing ballads in print, and who really, really likes print. And it's worth saying that because we often think of Shakespeare as someone who avoided print. But here we have him absolutely promoting certain print stuffs. Provided they're ballads, or in ballad form. And as I said, that's because a ballad is such a good advert and a memento of a play. And let me show you an example of how important a ballad can be in terms of recalling a play to your mind. I'm going to start with a bit of 2 Henry IV. See if thou canst find out Sneak's noise. This means Sneak's musicians. It's a slightly derogatory way of saying that. See if thou canst find out Sneak's noise. I'll see if I can find out Sneak. And later we get enter music, so Sneak and his noise must have been found. The music is come, sir, Falstaff. Let them play, sirs. So presumably the music begins. Sit on my knee, doll. And the scene goes on. Now, the reason I'm putting that bit of text in your mind is because of a really extraordinary text written by a man called Richard Ligon, who travelled to Barbados in the 1640s and wrote about it in the 1650s. And en route to Barbados, he stopped off at, is it Cape Verde or Cape Verde? He stopped off at that small African island. And what happened there was this. And we're in about 1647-48. In comes an old fellow, a lute in his hand, and played us for a novelty the Passam Sayres Galliard, a tune in great esteem in Harry IV's days. For when Sir John Falstaff makes his amours to Mistress Doltaire Street, Sneak and his company, the admired fiddlers of that age, plays this tune. Now, there's something very weird going on in Ligon's mind because he's getting confused between actual Henry IV and Shakespeare's fictional play of Henry IV. And so he thinks it's extraordinary that they, out in Africa, think this is a new tune because it's really ancient. But you can also see how he hears the tune and it recalls not just the play, but that very moment. And actually, this also gives us useful textual information because the text itself doesn't tell us either that Sneak's company are fiddlers or which tune it is they play. We know it only from here, and we don't know it that well because it hasn't made its way to editions yet, but it will do. What a long time this tune had in sailing from England to this place. But we might think otherwise. We might think how extraordinary that a tune from England is being played in Africa. But of course, that's the other great thing about ballads, or ballad tunes at any rate, that they travel way more quickly and much, much further than, say, a play does. Not least because if it's just the tune, you don't need language for it. At various moments, we see Shakespeare kind of placing, it seems, a ballad into your mind, even if it's not sung. So in the play of Antony and Cleopatra, schooled rhymers will ballad us out of tune. I shall see some squeaking Cleopatra, boy, my greatness, with the posture of a whore. So Cleopatra is really worried that she'll be performed by a boy. And maybe the joke is that it is a boy performer who's saying these lines. But she's also worried that rhymers will make ballads of her, probably suggesting, if the second bit is ironic, probably this is ironic, that there is indeed such a tune, such a ballad. That is very likely Antony and Cleopatra, well-known story. In Midsummer Night's Dream, a ballad is promised. I will get Peter Quince to write a ballad of this dream. It shall be called Bottom's Dream, and I will sing it at the latter end of the play. It's not sung at the latter end of Midsummer Night's Dream as we know it, though it may be sung after that text, which is something I'm about to come to. But what we can see is a Shakespeare who seems to be very into print ballads, seems to have linked ballads to his plays. And whereas with Ben Jonson, we were pretty sure Jonson was writing them, with Shakespeare it's a little bit less clear if he's writing them, though I wouldn't be surprised if there were a lot of lost Shakespeare actually in the ballad world. I'm not the one who's going to hunt for that, because all attribution people are mean. But Shakespeare has a ballad thing, a print obsession. This maybe explains how his plays, how several of them end up in print. We often think he didn't want it. Maybe he did want it because he had relationships with printers. That's the end of the super long bit. Now I'll go quickly, and this will be much shorter. I'm now thinking briefly, so all that bit was on ballads in plays. And I'm now thinking of ballads at the end of plays. When a play stops, out comes the clown and dances a jig and often sings along to it. And jigs are ballads. And here is a picture, here's a ballad with a picture on it of the famous clown Richard Tolton. And Tolton seems to have been the person who invented putting jigs after plays. And he died in the 1580s. There's a picture of Tolton. And here, here's a surviving jig. And this is a weird one. It's by John Dowland, who, again, he's a very posh lutenist, plays for court. And either he's recording a Tolton jig or maybe writing a jig for Tolton. So once again, having talked about high and low literature, we can maybe talk about the same with music, that ballads are a strange, odd mixture of everything. Here's a Tolton jig. Kemp was Shakespeare's early clown. Here's a Kemp jig, also published with, on the right, some unreadable instructions about how to dance it in a circle. Here's a jig for Singer, clown of the rival company, at the Rose Theatre, and noted here in lute tablature, if you want to play it on your lute. So plays ended with jigs, and jigs were special ballads. And here, if you can see at the top, here is a ballad sold called Francis's New Jig, between Francis a gentleman and Richard a farmer, to the tune of Walsingham. And you can see how theatrical this is. It's got exits and changes of tune in it. And here's Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, and that ends with a not totally relevant ballad. So what we might see here is, okay, so plays stop, but then a jiggy ballad happens. And if that's the case, then that means that even plays that don't have ballads end in ballads. That means that ballads are really, really quintessential to your entertainment, and that the last thing you'll experience as an audience member is that you'll hear a ballad, and that you'll leave whatever play you've been to maybe humming. That's the second kind of strange relationship between ballads and plays. And this covers all plays up until about 1612, when jigs were banned in some theatres. Sometimes instead of a jig, you would have an exchange of themes. An audience member would shout out a theme, a question, and the clown would do an extempore dance response, which he would sing. So that would again be to ballad tunes. So plays always end with ballads. And here's a third weird relationship between ballads and plays. And these are ballads that tell the same stories as plays. And it's often thought that there aren't many of them. But in fact, there are tons, although not all of them survive. But I've been listing ballad play twosomes, and I found some interesting things. And one I'll show you here is how often in the 1590s, it's John Danter who is publishing the ballads that go with plays, even ballads for different playing companies and by different authors. So we can start to see some kinds of logics here. Maybe John Danter seems to be the ballad play guy. But what we can't tell is, does the theatre want that? Have they gone to him as the ballad play guy? Or does he send a sort of journalist types to each theatre, going, kind of, note down the play, come back with a ballad on it? Or does it not always work that way? Remember how tricky dating is. Are ballads sometimes actually the source to plays? We never think of that because, again, we have them in our head as low literature. But there's no reason why they shouldn't be the source stories to plays sometimes. What we can say is, once they both exist, ballad and play, they co-advertise. They're both good for one another. And sticking with co-advertising, have a look at this very weird thing. This is a ballad of which there is also a play. It's the Ballad of the Spanish Tragedy. Again, tricky to date. Here's the play of the Spanish Tragedy, but in its 8th edition. In its 8th edition, the play of Spanish Tragedy acquires a picture which it hasn't had hitherto. And that almost certainly is because the ballad has the picture and has lent the picture to the play for co-advertising. Alternatively, it's the other way around, but remember, ballads need pictures, but plays do not need pictures. The bad news then would be that these pictures that we've made much of, thinking they illustrate our plays, probably actually illustrate ballads. But the intriguing thing is to think of how and why it might be that different printers and different publishers are sharing pictures, and it must be for co-advertising reasons. It must be that the ballad advertises the play and the play the ballad. And same story with this ballad of Arden of Faversham. Here's the ballad with, again, a ballad-specific picture. And remember, ballad-specific pictures are more expensive than random pictures. So, quite a lot has been put into this. Here's the play of Arden of Faversham in its 3rd edition, and here's the next page. And once again, you can see Arden of Faversham has acquired that picture. And I think it's clearer that it's acquired the picture in that it has to put the picture sideways to fit it into the book. So it's not for the book, but it's got the picture from the ballad. So once ballads and plays exist, either in performance or in text, they co-advertise, which is why the one might call upon the other. So that, very, very, very briefly, is the story of ballads about plays. So you can see I've now looked at ballads in plays, ballads after plays, and ballads about plays. But I've said we can't always tell which comes first, ballad or play. But once they exist, they are mutually helpful to one another. Now, as a general editor for Arden 4, amongst the questions I need to have some understanding of for myself is, when does a play, what is a play? When does it stop? And these ballads confuse everything, because should plays have full ballads at the back of them? Because are they kind of paratext to those plays? And should you, when you're editing a full play, at the moment when you might have put the end, instead put enter clown with ballad jig? Because that did happen. But is that part of the event or part of the play? So these are the kinds of things that you don't have to have answers, though if you do, I'd be thrilled. But these are the kind of things that are a concern to me with respect to these ballads. Fourth brief part for some conclusions. So having talked about these plays that seem to batten on ballads in a really weird way, one wonders, of course, how near to the playhouse can one buy ballads? So here we have a reference to this unsufferable loitering quality in singing of ballads and songs at the doors of such houses where plays are used. So play doors, playhouse doors. Thou'lt be a ballad monger. I shall live to see thee stand in a playhouse door with thy long box. Okay, so ballad singers seem to be at the playhouse doors. And that makes obvious sense. Here's a picture of a queue. I couldn't find one by a theatre. There aren't many pictures. But this is a queue. It's actually of people to go onto the frozen Thames. But I just wanted to say, a long queue, a massive queue. If you have a massive queue outside your theatre, they're going to get bored and restless, have little fights, be annoying. But if there are ballad singer-sellers there, they're going to be entertained. They won't be annoying. They will buy ballads. So that works for the ballad singer-seller and works for the theatre. Might they even have been linked? Might they have been a kind of concession of the theatre? Or is the fact that they're at the doors outside rather than in the theatre, does that mean they're not? But they're all happy with their mutual relationship. What we can say is what this means is that plays, before you enter the playhouse, you hear ballads and maybe buy them. And that might explain how you could be expected, perhaps, to have the Willow Song in your hand while you're hearing the play. So before and seemingly after plays, you'll hear and maybe buy ballads. So that ballads are a massive but distant paratext. Really para, because geographically they're outside the theatre, not in it, but they're hovering at the door. So it's a very strange, interesting relationship. And finally, who are ballad singer-sellers? Who does this stuff? Here is a picture of a ballad singer-seller. It's a good picture, which means it's not English. It's in fact Dutch. This is how you do it. You bring a little stool or you get onto a high place and you sell your ballads. And you can see this man, he has ballads in one hand, he's singing, he's sort of charismatic, he's quite ugly. Okay, it's fine being ugly if you're a ballad singer-seller. Here's another one. Because if people are going to stare at you, you might as well get money for it. So here are some ugly ones. Here's one who's a lady, not ugly, but other. Women can't act on the stage, but they can sing ballads relevant to the play outside. Because I am suggesting that if there are going to be ballads in the play and after the play, there's very likely to be a link between the play door ballads and the ones you're going to hear. I think that it would suit everyone to make there be that kind of link. And if we hear some descriptions of ballad singers, singer-sellers, the noseless ballad woman, to hear the noseless ballad woman raise her snuffling throat. Write some ballads for blind David and his boy. Stanzas which halt and hobble as lamely as that one-legged cantor that sings them. So you can see, being a ballad singer-seller, that's a good job for people with disabilities, because, as I say, they're going to be stared at anyway. So, here's my final slide, and I'll draw some conclusions from that. So talking about those people, they're kind of peripheral people. We've said the texts are peripheral to the play. We've said the geographical space is peripheral to the theatre. We've said the people are kind of peripheral people, not least if we think of the way all actors inside the theatre will be white men and not disabled or ladies. But in this final ballad, I want to reverse or take back the entire talk that I've just given. Few words are best, as the ballad reminds me. And it also says, come buy this new ballad before you do go. If you rail at the author, I know what I know. Very threatening. And here is an English picture, so rubbish against the ones I've been showing you. There's the ballad seller singer, probably lame, he's got a stick, he's clearly old, he's poor. And there is a stylish young gentleman in a cloak with roses on his shoes, and he's urgently, keenly buying a ballad, thrusting his money. Because ballads bring together the poor and the rich. Rich people loved ballads, collected them like stamps. So let's think about the contradictions in this very text and then go back through the talk. I made it that the talk was about plays and that ballads were all kinds of peripheral. But suppose we reversed it and the talk was about ballads, then plays would be all kinds of peripheral. And now let's think how limited the plays are. As I say, only white men perform them. Everyone performs ballads. Plays geographically only happen in that little theatre. But ballads happen outside the theatre, but in all marketplaces, outside churches, everywhere, and they get into houses and they get to Africa. And finally, plays. We've shown how they sort of need ballads. They want you to get them. They're promoting them. But ballads don't need plays in the same way. They've got their own circulation. You can thoroughly enjoy a ballad without a play. So, in conclusion, I go right back to the first slide, which asked us which was the frippery and which was the froth. And I'm going to leave that there as a question. Thank you very much.
Tiffany, thank you so much. I think you could tell from the audience reaction that there were lots of little quips and quiddities in there that we all really enjoyed. I think lots of us enjoy that kind of lecture where it pops up and you think, how did she find that? All those little connective tissue bits that you had there. So it was just absolutely lovely, thank you. And you raised a lot of questions at the end that you might want the audience to answer. But obviously this is an opportunity for the audience to ask questions as well. Tiffany has kindly said she will take any questions if there are any, but I also think she's champing at the bit to find out what you all think. Ben.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. You mentioned the... Is that on? Is that all right? Is that helpful? Yeah. You mentioned the slightly mean authorship people. And one of the things I suppose that's happened perhaps in the past couple of decades is the rise of authorship studies and a kind of deconstruction of the solidity of that category. Authors are not tidy things. I'm just wondering, thinking also about some of your other work, documents of performance and so on, is part of what you're thinking through here a similar kind of deconstruction of a sort of category of narrative or literary form in a way? You are showing us, I suppose, partly that the play, if you push at its edges, kind of comes apart a bit and can be found elsewhere. And I'm just wondering if we're at a moment where, you know, you might think of yourself as a kind of theatre historian or someone who does early modern drama. Perhaps that's a sort of way of thinking about modern reading and literary criticism that's a little anachronistic.
Yes, thank you, Ben. Yes, in terms of deconstructing the play, I think absolutely, because parts of the genre play are genre ballad. And I do think it's interesting to see how those two sort of circle around one another in strange ways. And I'm very, very interested in how you might want to preserve the wholeness of a play while letting its ballad bits wander off, because that's going to be helpful in advertising terms. So yes, I think I am putting pressure on that. I also think, the mean, horrible authorship people, and they have nasty computer programs, and then the computer programs always find what they thought anyway, because of the way they've asked the question. But I think it would be harder to do analyses of that kind on ballads. I'm not sure the right question is who authored it, and I think some of them are co-authored. So it could be that you write a bit of a ballad in your play, and then a ballad writer extends it and puts it out as a broadside. But I also think because ballads have their own metre and their own kinds of words that they use, I think a ballad has some sort of, will make you write in a particular generic way, which might make it harder to read back through the sophistication of play language. So I think authorship studies would be hard to do on ballads, but I do suspect there's a load of weird stuff. I mean, because what's also weird is that I've shown playwrights here really pushing ballads, but they're also in their plays often mean about them. But being mean about them, that might be because it probably is because of a particular kind of familiarity, or even because they don't want to be associated with that thing that they are in fact producing. So sorry, that was a slightly rambling answer, but to the two bits. I think authorship studies would be hard to do on ballads, thank goodness. But I also think they raise some big questions, both about what a play is and also about what paratext is, what is text and what is paratext.
Thank you so much, Tiff. That was brilliant, as your stuff always is. I wondered if you could do a little more thinking through that example that you took from The Winter's Tale and Autolycus and selling ballads. And I do this particularly as someone who's kind of interested in Robert Armin, who seems to have played Autolycus, if we take Simon Foreman's kind of note about his performance. And Simon, Armin, who is the new clown of the theatre, first gains fame as a ballad writer and appears in 1592, actually in the same text that we first learn about Shakespeare as a notorious ballad maker. So as, think a bit about the sort of in-jokes of Autolycus as Armin, selling those strange stories of, women who gave birth to money bags and things.
Yes. And I'm going to answer that question by hopping back a clown, because I think this is an earlier story that's then iterated on the stage. So Tolton, whose picture I showed, started life as a ballad writer and went on writing ballads throughout his life, often, in fact, serious ballads, some of which survive. And he also became sort of the best-known clown of his time, and he also seems to have invented jigs, but I think that was because he was already selling ballads and he was sticking them at the end of plays to sell them some more. So what I actually think he set in motion was that clowns are also ballad writers. And I think Armin is, who's kind of Tarleton's inheritor, takes that on. And what that in fact means, and I didn't have time to go into it here, is that it means we've got playwrights writing and selling ballads and clowns writing and selling ballads. We've got the theatre producing ballads that then surround it in some way. And we've also got a strange connection between clowns and playwrights meeting in those texts. And in terms of Winter's Tale, I don't have much more to say about it except it being Armin makes it even more hilarious, but also sells ballads even better, so works for everyone. And of course, it could be an Armin ballad rather than a Shakespeare ballad in there. You know, those clown ballads, it's hard to know where authorship starts and stops.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks for that wonderful lecture. I want to stick with the late plays, actually, and your reference to the Tempest and the picture of nobody as a reference to John Trundle. And it just seems really interesting if you put that side by side with the reference to Richard Field in Cymbeline, disguised as Richard Duchamp, and the in-joke that Bart was talking about there in The Winter's Tale. So I just wondered what's going on at this time in Shakespeare's playwriting.
Okay, that's a super interesting point. And my off-the-cuff thought, I am very intrigued by the way Shakespeare is just massively into print. Because the late plays are not printed the way his earlier plays are. And so I wonder whether in late plays, is he in fact leading up to a collection he's hoping will be put together, that ends up being put together after his death, and is the folio? Is that what's going on? That he's just heralding his association with printers more and more as his texts are not being printed. Maybe it's something like that. I want to keep the right to change my mind when I've thought more about it, but that's my immediate thought. I am very interested that Ben Jonson is kind of selling himself through ballads, but Shakespeare, who's not necessarily selling himself, is selling print and ballads themselves. So there's something about his tricky but deep negotiation with printed texts.
Thank you.
Simon.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me? Yeah, hi, Tiff. Question. I'm just wondering whether you're slightly underselling ballads. And the reason I say that is because you concentrate upon them as advertising and co-advertising. And I was thinking about that last question about frith or frippery, whatever it was, and what I hear when I get an image of all those guys, or men and women selling ballads, is I'm reminded of sort of hip-hop competitions and rap and stuff. You go to any plaza or something, that's what goes on. And, and they're happy in their world, but they always want more. And they want to get on the stage. They want to be heard. And it just seems to me that there's just as likely to be a competition to be the person on the stage as not. And, there's this kind of rivalrousness going, and look at me, and then, so in that sense, it's the stage which is the...
Which is the winner.
The telos, the winner. But that relates to the more important point, I think, which is to do with, again, thinking about today, analogies, you've got these people on their boxes shouting, and they're not shouting just to make money, they're often shouting because they believe in something, because they care about something, they want to convert people. They're didactic or insane. And, and surely these ballads are often political. They've got purpose, that they're trying to change minds, whatever. And so I'm just wondering about that, the whole question of you've got this amazing kind of radiation, this kind of circulation, which the theatre can galvanise. So I'm just wondering about that. It's more than advertising.
Yeah. Yes. You are right. And you're partly pointing to the fact that ballads are on more stuff and they're in more places than just... I was focusing on play ballads, but actually my difficulty in thinking about this throughout has been sort of the richness and the range of ballads. So for one thing, ballads might be on play stories or Unfortunate Love or the Bible, classical stories, advice, pornography. It's all in ballads. You have everything in ballads. And so they are kind of tremendous and very, very pervasive. In terms of the competition, I love the idea of the shouting outside the theatre and then the shouting in the theatre. I think what I've had enormous difficulty working out is where the relation, who has what relationship. So, and I'm still confused. Is it that the theatre owns concessions in the theatre, so the theatre owns food and drink sold in the theatre and makes money out of that? Does it have some financial arrangement with the Ballads? Does it pay them? Or do they pay him, pay the theatre? Or does neither pay, but they all put up with one another because it works for both? And that question becomes, will the theatre release to the ballad singer sellers what texts are going to be in their play? Or will they pinch them? Or will they... So, because I can't work out whether it's a rivalrous relationship, it's a linked relationship, and I can't work out whether who pays whom and who owns the relationship. And you've kind of put your finger on a problem that I'm still really wrestling with, that these things have not a casual connection, but I don't know who owns the connection, which is sort of why I tried to get around it by reversing the whole talk at the end. But yeah, it's fascinating, and it also puts so much more music in the play in the plays than we'd thought, and I'm also quite interested in. I talked about in the kind of person. You're right. They might. Those different people who are often poor and sometimes disabled, and I suspect sometimes exotics from other countries, and anyone who stands out. Those people, some will indeed feel deeply for their ballads, and some it will just be the way they get their living. And they don't have to have good voices. That's not what it's about, because ballads can be sung by everyone. So I suspect the problem is one cannot characterize them as one type of person. So one cannot give them agency when one can't give them language outside the ballads that they sing. So I think you've really got to the heart of some of the problems that I'm having pushing this further, but I think they are really crucial problems.
Thank you very much, Tiffany. Now, I don't think, as far as I know, we have any ballad singer sellers outside the door. I don't think we have orange sellers, ladies of the night, I hope, or ale, but we do have some very nice wine in the Reynolds room. So it only remains to say thank you very much indeed, Tiffany, for coming to visit us. Thank all of you for your questions, and thank you and good night to everybody who's on the live stream as well. Tiffany, thank you so much.
Thank you.